All right. Well, welcome to what is the very first long form video on the Worm Crab channel. Somebody requested that I do a worm ranking, and I figured a worm tier list might be kind of along those lines. So that's what we're doing here today. It's worth disclaiming that not only am I not a scientist, whatever the furthest thing from it might be, but I'm working with some smart scientists. So today we're going to pretend like that's what I am. Uh, Now, I also have to come clean and admit that most of the research I've done is around one or two species of worm. So I have learned a lot about the worms that I'm talking about today, really in the last 48 hours. So if I make any mistakes or anything, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll learn together on this, have a little fun. The point of this is just to have a good time and talk about science and interesting insects. Uh, and so, with that, we're focusing on really five basic characteristics of these worms. Of course, how interesting is the worm? Are they fun? Are they cool looking? What makes them unique? Then, of course, are they good at making compost? That's the main focus at Worm Crap is whether or not worms are actually making compost and they're good at it. Then, of course, classically scientific, would I enjoy grabbing a beer with that worm? Does the worm seem chill? Do they seem like they'd have an interesting conversation? Then, of course, would I let the worm look after my dog? And really, this one's more about looking after y'all. Should you love your girlfriend, your significant other, if they are this worm? And these are really the big characteristics that entomologists use when ranking worms. So we're going to stick with these characteristics. Right off the bat, of course, we're jumping in with the red wiggler. They're, a classic worm. When people think of worms, when people look at farming worms, the red wiggler is that worm. They're called Acinia fetidae. That's their scientific name. And they're named that way. If you checked out the very first worm fact we put up, they're named that way because they let off a bad smell when they get scared or stressed, which is pretty unique. Not a whole lot of worm species do that. And it can smell pretty bad. When I first got started with this, I had about 70,000 red wigglers that I kept inside my house, which is a mistake. And they do not only smell, when you get that many together, they sound like rustling leaves when they move around, which is a startling thing to learn. They're one of many species of animal out there, and very common amongst worms, that are both male and female. We're going to power on through. That are both male and female, and they are that at the exact same time. It's called a hermaphroditic species, and it's pretty common in nature. And, as far as these worms go, I wouldn't call them crazy interesting, except for the fact that they can eat a lot, which makes them great at making compost. They are the go to vermicomposting worm. I don't know how interesting it would be to have a beer with. It might have some things to talk about. They certainly do eat widespread. Uh, but they're easy to love. They're not going to do anything offensive. It's a classic worm. I'm going to have to, give it a strong B tier. Definitely a good starter worm if you're looking for a starter worm. Our next one is going to be penworms. They're called Entrobius vermicularis. When I butcher these, don't come after me. Just, put the taxonomy or, the pronunciation down in the comments and we'll move past it, right? So these are the most common parasitic worm in humans, especially in the more developed countries. They're very common in, the kids do commonly get infections of pinworms. They live a relatively short life cycle, only a couple of weeks. Female pinworms, they like to move from the intestines down to the anus, where they'll lay eggs and cause an itching sensation. Typically, they can be treated topically or with a anti-parasitic, and they like eating mucus and undigested food, which says that they might be a decent composter. They're certainly not chill. They're not pleasant, but as far as parasites go, they're not typically destructive, which places them a little higher in that parasite ranking. You know, I don't know how interesting a worm that eats butt material is, but you gotta give it somewhere in the middle. I certainly wouldn't want it looking after my dog. And if you really love your significant other, maybe it's okay to love them as this worm, but that's kind of pushing it. I think they gotta fall in C tier as far as a parasite goes. They're certainly not bad. So, you can give them a bit of a benefit of the doubt. Uh, Moving on, we've got the giant Gippsland earthworm, and these guys are sick. Megascolides australis, not at all shocking. They're native to Australia, and they are the biggest earthworm in the world. They can grow up to 9 meters, but really they average about 1 to 3 meters. They're awesome. They're also one of the very few worms that show a seasonal reproductive cycle. Generally, in the high summer from September to December, our northern hemisphere friends out there got to remember that that's winter down there. And they have a 12-month gestational period. They have a longer gestational period than even humans, which is crazy. They lay eggs in buried plots, under leaves, and burrows. And those eggs take over a year or about a year to hatch and become worms. And for a while, they were thought to be extinct until recently being rediscovered in small broods. I don't remember off the dome their geographic location, but they're sick. I mean, what an awesome worm. Fascinating, unique, and massive. Uh, you know, Absolutely. Look, they're Australian, right? So they're going to be easy and fun to drink with. You'd absolutely let it look after anyone. A worm that size is going to put up a fight, take care of business. And God, so lovable, right? You've got to call that just a solid S tier worm. I mean, what a beautiful worm right there. Moving on to one of our favorites, tapeworms. These are called cystota, and there are a series of subspecies, so we can't get any more specific than that. But tapeworms are, they're destructive, but they're interesting. You certainly call them unique. They're among one of the larger flatworms. It's worth going back to the giant earthworm from Australia. That's one of the larger roundworms. Tapeworms are definitely among the larger flatworms. They can grow to be several meters long, and they're very common in humans. They're definitely a particularly dangerous parasite. They have caused a lot of issues. Uh, they can be terminal if not treated properly, but they can also be treated pretty easily with an antiparasitic. Now, one of the more unique things about them is that for a while, and you can still do this, for a while, people would actually take tapeworm eggs in capsules for weight loss, which is not smart, especially not smart given that back then and even still today, we do have cocaine, which I would call just as effective for weight loss and probably less deadly and certainly more fun. Uh, you're not going to want to love on this worm. You're not wanting it in your house. You're not wanting it around your pets. You're certainly not going to want to love this worm if it's your significant other. So this has to be an F tier worm. This is kind of a nightmare. There's nothing good about these guys. Now, we want to move on to really our kind of the creme de la creme, the common earthworm. These earthworms are everywhere, starting originally in Europe. The one that we know of as Lumbricus terrestrius is what we identify as the common earthworm. It's known as the night crawler in Canada and northern North America. actually is invasive. The species we know of as the common earthworm is originally from Europe and is invasive everywhere else, but it is metropolitan. It is considered now to be semi native or invasive to every continent except Antarctica. Uh, Now, one of the fascinating things about them is that they're a burrowing worm. So they actually burrow and they come dig their way up and they drag plant matter and earth matter down to lower levels of the soil, which makes them good for the environment where they're native. But they can actually outcompete other worms in non native areas, which makes them semi problematic. Now, they are good composters and they're great for fishing. If you're fishing just about anywhere, they're being farmed for fishing worms, and fish love to eat them. Uh, you know, you can definitely love it. As far as destructive invasive species go, they're not terribly destructive, but they're not great. They're not particularly interesting. There's a reason they're called common. So, as far as worms go, it's going to have to fall solidly into our B tier as far as worms. They're fine, but they're not special. And given that they're invasive, we're actually going to have to move our red wigglers up to A tier because they might be boring, but they're not causing problems. Here's where we get horrifying. The Arctic scale worm. First off, fuck this thing. I mean, horrifying. Now, they do have male and female sexes, though. There are many of them that are male and female, not explicitly hermaphroditic, but hermaphrodism is very common in these worms. Now, we don't know a whole lot about these worms. They live in the deep sea near the Antarctic. By the way, Eulogisca gigante is their scientific name, and they can be 7 to 8 inches long, which is way too big for something that looks like this. And they're also one of the very few species of worm that has eyes, real, separate, developed eyes. Horrifying. I mean, Jesus Christ, what was God thinking when they made this? Just awful worm. We're going to fill out our ranking. We're going to give it D tier because at least it's not bad for people or the environment, but I have no interest in this thing. I'm good. Siberian earthworm. What can be said about Encenia nordiscoldi that hasn't already been said by scientists everywhere? A lot. There's not a whole lot of research on these guys. They are the northernmost species of earthworm. They have spread as far down as northern China, but they actually show a clear interest in cold weather. These worms actually, when given opportunities between warmer and colder climates, have been shown in studies to move to colder places, which is cool. And they're really special because the cold has a tendency to preserve decaying matter and make it hard to break down. And the Siberian earthworm helps break that matter down and helps keep the carbon cycle alive in cold areas, which makes them a very special, unique worm. So with that, we're gonna have to give them a strong A tier. I mean, these worms, they play a major role. They're inoffensive, so you can love them. There's no blame there. Nobody's gonna look at you the wrong way. And given that they love the cold, they're gonna take care of those that you love, especially your dog, right? I'm letting a Siberian earthworm look after my dog. Hammerhead worms. This is Bipalium strubella. Uh, and they are highly invasive in the US and North America. They're a tropical worm. I believe they are more native to the Asian subtropics. But I mean, don't be fooled by their interesting appearance or cool, pretty colors. They tend to be colorful. They are super invasive and they are super toxic. They produce something called tetrodotoxin, and it paralyzes their prey. They are full-on hunters. They consume them typically whole, and they are a huge risk to North America. Uh, they they hunt down and kill native earthworm and decomposing species. So if you see them, salt them. Don't cut them apart. They can regenerate. Don't bury them or burn them. That toxin can get aerosolized, and in small concentrations, it can be okay for people. I say okay tentatively. It's dangerous. Put salt on these motherfuckers. Let them die. They are bad if you see them in the US. If you see them in other places, I'm not exactly sure their total natural range. But, we hate a colonizer. So kill these guys. This is going to have to go straight to our F tier. Moving on from here to something else fun, heartworms. Uh, Scientific name is Dirofilaria. And yes, I am reading their scientific name right here. I'm not smart enough to memorize this stuff. Uh, they're highly parasitic and they are transmitted by nature's bloodsuckers, ticks, leeches, and mosquitoes, but really most commonly mosquitoes. They get sucked up, their eggs get sucked up and moved to other places, and they hatch inside of mosquitoes, and then they're dropped right off that mosquito's proboscis straight into your body where they will grow and just eat away at the lining of your arteries, veins, heart. They're not good. Certainly don't want to go drinking with them. They're not going to have anything fun to say. They might have some travel stories, but that's going to be about it. You don't want to leave it alone with anyone, and you certainly don't want to keep loving it. It's not a worm to love. Uh, you know, they typically infect animals. They're not super common in humans, but if they do, they're especially dangerous because you tend not to notice them until they've done some pretty significant damage. They can be treated with anti parasitics, but of course, at that point, you already have some lasting consequences from these worms. Solidly F tier worm. This is not a worm you're going to want to vibe with. From here, we've got ribbon worms, and these guys are pretty cool. They are Nemeritae, and there's a number of species of ribbon worm. They're not segmented roundworms, which is relatively unique for the worm species, for the segmented worm species at least. Now, they are hunting worms. They shoot their prey with those ribbons. They're called proboscis, and they can take the form of tendrils or spikes. Now, many of these worms produce a neurotoxin which coats their proboscis, which is not immediately dangerous for most people, but can build up if handled improperly. That makes them potentially dangerous. Not an outright menace, but certainly something to be careful with. These guys, for me, I gotta say, they rank somewhere in the B to C. They're definitely interesting, but they're not good at composting. They're not going to do anything particularly useful. And, you just want to be a little hazardous with these guys. You can love them, but from a distance, this is a long distance relationship style worm. And while they're not going to probably hunt my dog, I'm not going to want him to spend too much time there. So, B for unique, B for interesting. It definitely raises that bar, but we're not going any higher than that. Now, nematodes. These guys are fascinating, right? Uh, your nematodes, the interesting thing with them is they're a type of roundworm. In fact, we use nematode as the broad category for roundworm, but we also use it as a subcategory. Uh, there's a lot of debate as to their benefit. Some are really good at breaking down plant material and adding to the soil. But that also means that many species of nematode will just attack plants and eat the living plants in that soil and break them down into good soil. You also have a lot of nematodes that they attacked attack pest species of insect, but a lot of pest species like flies and others are actually really important for breaking down soil. So they have kind of this interesting middle ground. And so with that kind of mix, I don't want to knock them too much, but I'm certainly not sending them up high. I've got to say, it's a true neutral worm. Some nematodes, they are, they're great. You'd want to hang out with them. You're gonna love that nematode, and you're even gonna trust it to spend some time with your pets. Others, though, you're not gonna want any of that, and it can be hard to identify them. So we're gonna drop them right there in the middle. Now this one's fascinating. Palola worms, or Palola viridis, uh, they are a fascinating worm. They're a tropical worm. They tend to be found in tropical islands like Fiji and Samoa. And really, the cool thing about them, other than them being very pretty, is that their reproductive habits are so unique. What they do is their anterior end, called the epitoke, shoots off and swims toward the surface, and research is indicating that these rear ends could have eyes and swimming paraphernalia as if they are a second stage life. Uh, and these rear ends, these epitokes, they swim to the surface, they find each other, they breed, and then they release eggs that, sink to the bottom. And the worm doesn't die. No, the front end of the worm just burrows during mating season and then comes back out. It does not die. It keeps living, regrows that epitoke, and launches it the next year. Uh, and they show lunar cycle and annual life cycles. They are longer lived worms. And one of the kind of interesting things about this is that tribes and locals still today harvest these worms, the epitopes. So they harvest the worm rear ends and consume them as a delicacy, which means that Moana's definitely eaten worm butts, uh, which is fascinating. I mean, the AIM-9 missile of the entomological world, right? Just a really cool worm. Now, they're predatory, but they're not particularly dangerous. They only eat small things. I gotta say, this for me, this is a solid S tier worm. I'm gonna get a drink with it. It's gonna tell me all about the fascinating stories it has. Uh, I want to spend time with this worm, right? So our next one has to be the Caribbean fireworm, and these guys are fascinating. Odontocilus enopla, definitely mispronounced that one. These worms and the females, they get their name because the females during mating season, which is cyclical and follows the lunar cycle actually rather close. They come up to the surface and they light up for a few minutes and they let off this mucus. And the males follow behind this mucus trail and mate. And it's really, really cool. They're all over the coast of the Caribbean. And it's believed that the OG colonizer, Christopher Columbus, actually thought that there were already Europeans in the Caribbean because he saw them off the side of his ship and thought that they were candles. That's kind of the common story there. Really fascinating, beautiful worms. And so with that, they've got to be a solid A tier worm, right? Yes, they're predatory, so they're not going to compost well, but they only eat small crustaceans, and you got to give them that credit, right? Beautiful worms, very interesting, definitely going to have a good story. Nobody tells a better story than somebody who managed to walk Chris. From that, we have the Christmas tree worm. These guys are awesome. Spirinobrachus gigantus. They're beautiful worms and they have really long life cycles. They're pretty small, only 1 to 2 inches, but they build hard shells around them and those little Christmas tree, not palm tree, fir tree looking branches are actually how they eat. They use those to filter out, kind of like the baleen in whales. They use it to filter out small plankton, stuff like that. And the hard shells that they make actually help grow coral reefs, which is something that we really, really need right now. They're beautiful. They're not great composters, but they're building the structures of nature. With that, I gotta give it an A tier. It's hard to rank these worms low. They're not gonna have a super interesting conversation. They don't travel a whole lot. With that in mind, the fact that I couldn't have a drink with it and I couldn't compost with it, I think we're gonna safely move them to B tier, but definitely a strong worm. Definitely nothing to be upset about. Next, we've got a night terror, right? The bobbit worm, Eunice aphroditis. Uh, Never trust a Eunice, right? We should all live by that. That's a reality. Don't trust a Eunice. They're a predatory ambush hunter, and they attack things as large as fish. Uh, they've been known to grow up to 10 feet. They've been in 2009, somebody caught a 10-foot long bobbit worm, but they tend to be 5 to 6 feet long. Short kings, right? They have very sensitive antennas but no eyes, and they are reported, some have claimed that they can be toxic or venomous. So you want to be careful with a bobbit worm. This is definitely nothing to play around with. And honestly, on one hand, I feel like it knows how to party. It's going to have a good time. It's going to tell a good story. I don't want it near my family. I certainly am going to kick it out of bed. It's a firm C tier worm. It's they're not evil. They're doing their job, but it's a C tier worm. Next, we've got the black soldier fly larva, right? The worm fly. This is Hermetia elucens. Awesome worm. Not a worm. This is where I have to come clean. It's a fly larva. But I have to add it in here. They're one of the most voracious eaters out there. They have one of the longest worm cycles of any fly, which I think makes them more worm than fly. And they can even eat some types of plastic and synthetic chemicals. So they're monster composters. It's not going to tell me anything interesting. In fact, it might burp in my ear, but I'm going to trust it at home. It's not doing anything evil. And in fact, they are shown to be antibacterial. They make things safer for people with stomach acids capable of breaking down things like E. coli. You're not getting Giardia from this little worm, right? Trust it around family. You can love it. The adult black soldier flies are beautiful. They're beautiful. You can love this one. And so that makes it easily. This is an S tier, and I know I have a personal bias here, but this is an S tier worm for me. I will knock it down. To be fair, I'll knock it down to A tier just because it's not a worm, but it's more worm than fly. And that one I will fight in court. I will die on this hill. Next, here we've got a new worm. This is one of the more recent species of worm discovered in 2009. This is often called the fried eggworm, but its scientific name is Archaea ferritima middletoni, the fried eggworm. Very beautiful worm. Uh, they are weird worms. They don't burrow at all. They will move over and through piles of leaves, which is their primary food source. But they don't burrow. They're not great at being worms. Uh, but, you know, they seem interesting. They're unique. They're good at hide and go seek, which I think is important in a worm and in a life partner, which is why this is a strong A tier worm. Uh, I seem to keep doing this. I'm going to knock it down to B. It's not a great composter. We have to take that into account. It's also, it doesn't reproduce very fast, but it's going to have a good conversation. It's worth loving. It'll take care of the people around it. It's a good worm. Uh, and for that, we're leaving it in B. We're ending it off with the velvet worm. Onychooptera Opfera, again with the scientific names, right? Uh, these are cool. One of the very few terrestrial worms that have legs. And not only do they have legs, they have little claws on the end of their legs, which is fascinating. That's incredibly rare especially in the terrestrial worm species. They also haven't really changed in the last 500 million years. Entomologists consider them a living fossil. They are really a strong record of early animal development. Another cool thing is that some lay eggs. All of them actually they form inside eggs, but some lay eggs, but some actually hatch those eggs inside of their body, giving them a form of live birth, which is considered rather rare in the invertebrates and especially in the worm species group. Now, they are hunters. They're not composters. They're not decomposers. They are predatory. And they actually shoot slime that paralyzes their prey. And then they bite in with scissor-like jaws and suck out the inside, making them a teeny tiny horror. Uh, Now, they are not particularly dangerous to larger species, larger mammals, so they're not gonna harm you fast, but they can harm you long term. That toxin is a neurotoxin. It can build up on your skin or in your body. Your body doesn't really have a great way to process it. And so prolonged, consistent exposure to velvet worms can prove to be dangerous. So you want to be careful with them. They're not apt to get you, but they're certainly not going to be careful with you. Uh, you know, Between the interesting look, the scientific nature, the fact that this guy has 500 million years of stories to tell, it's an A tier worm. It's going to chat all night. It's going to be a fascinating worm. And if you're careful, right? If good long distance relationships, set clear boundaries, clear communication, you can love this worm. This is a good worm. This is an A tier worm right here. You don't want it looking after your dog, but there are plenty of relationships where you decide you don't need pets, right? Good, strong A tier worm. So here's my final worm tier list. You can see I've got another image here. This is a common earthworm before I realized that the nightcrawler is a common earthworm. It's just another name for it. So we're leaving that last image down there. No need to give the nightcrawler second ranking. Remember, they are invasive. Uh, but this is my definitive worm tier list. I gotta say, most of my favorite composters, I can't put them in S tier just because they're not blow you out of the water worms. What makes them unique is that they are common, that you see them everywhere, but they do good, quiet work. Most of the most important work in our society is done by quiet workers who just clock in. They do their important work, they punch out, they go home to see their family, take care of their dog, right? Key ranking features. If this is interesting to you, would love a like and follow. We're definitely trying to grow this, grow the mission, support the composting and the work that we're doing here at Worm Crap to reduce the environmental harm of food waste. I've got some videos here in shorts about that. I'm probably going to do some longer form content about it. Definitely going to talk more. If there's more things that you think I missed, things that you find interesting, or videos that you'd like us to do about entomology, composting, or gardening, drop that down in the comments. I'm definitely looking for more ways and ideas to engage in this longer form content and would love to hear from you. Till the next video,